Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. We continue with the horror theme of Don't Die July with a book pack from 2011, Seed by Ania Ahlborn. First off, the content warnings, and this book does include, amongst other things, child possession, parental abuse, animal mutilation, blood and gore. So, just so you're aware of that going in. As always, we'll look at the characters, the story, and the world building before some of the pros and cons of this one and my final thoughts at the end. So let's just jump straight into this one. The story starts with a literal bang. The family of Jack, Amy, and their two kids, Abigail and the youngest Charlotte, are involved in a car accident right at the start of the book when Jack sees something in the road, veers, and tips the car over. Following this, he thinks he sees something reflected in the night, something from his nightmares from when he was a child that he'd been trying to run away from for years. These animal-like silver glints like eyes. And then they were gone. And that's how the story begins, and this is very much asking the question of, can a curse be passed on through family ties? And this follows the story of what happens when that curse catches up with you. Jack ran away from home as a 14-year-old, although he doesn't quite remember how he got to be in Louisiana. He has a bit of a blank in his memory for why someone would pick up a 14-year-old boy on the roadside and just drive him to a new place. But he's created a new life and hid his past away from his wife Amy, and that past is now catching up with him. Amy is very much from a religious family whose parents don't approve of the marriage that she's engaged in with Jack, as they seem as some backwater hick, and they are God-fearing folk as well. And after the crash, the youngest child, Charlotte, begins to exhibit somewhat unusual behaviours. Initially, it's thought to be caused by shock from the accident, as you would expect, but over time, Jack begins to suspect that the demons from his own past have actually come home to roost and are actually there trying to inhabit his youngest daughter. And it's a story of him going back to his home in the end to try and find out the truth of what this is and what happened, and to try and save not just his daughter but his entire family. This is what, to me personally, is quite a typical fantastical sort of boogeyman under the bed horror story. It is a wonderful, slow, tension-filled sort of build from start to end, and I actually really like the story here. I do like these stories that are kind of rooted in almost like a folklore-esque feel to them, so I thought this was really good. Jack is very much the main character through most of this, although not everything is told from his point of view, but the majority of the story is. He's very much a grafter. He works on repairing boats, and in his spare time when he's not home with his family, he makes music with his friends, something that has been a bone of contention between him and his wife for years, as it takes time away from his kids spending with him. Well, whenever he's out doing music, he fetches back these weird knickknacks. Quite often they have like voodoo feel to them or mystical in some way, and he's naturally drawn to these things. He has a tattoo of some sort of creature all across his back, which he's never told anyone how it got there or why it's there. And this very much follows him trying to unravel his past and figure out if the thing that he's ran from has finally caught up with him. And you have a very, very sort of slow unraveling of all the secrets, as it's like, do I remember this? Oh my god, it is that. No, it can't be this. And almost denial as he's fighting against the demons in his own head before he ends up going home to find out the truth of why he left. He's married to Amy. Amy comes from a very, very Catholic family who do not approve of the marriage. They believe that he's some backwater hick who is going to fetch nothing but trouble to their wonderful daughter Amy. And then you have the two youngest children, Abigail and Charlie. And Charlie, or Charlotte, is kind of the secondary character in this, as she's the one who starts to exhibit signs of possible possession, although it's not clear from the outset whether that is what this is or not, due to the fact you have the accident at the start, and as you would expect, a 6-year-old being involved in a car accident would lead to some issues. What I will say is the unravelling of the family unit here, as they begin to doubt what's going on and Amy begins to suspect things and weird supernatural things start happening, is exceptionally well done. And you actually feel the family falling apart as the various different lies or mistruths come to fruition, and they begin to realise how little they can trust each other and how little they can trust themselves as well. And that really adds to the tension throughout this entire story, and it's exceptionally well done. World building is a little more sparse than you might expect here. There is a little bit when you go into Jack's backstory about the land that his family managed to buy really cheap for some reason when he was a kid, and a graveyard that he accidentally found one day, which is where all this journey really began, and how since then, since he moved away and his family met whatever fate they apparently met, that part of the road where the house was is now abandoned. People don't go down there because terrible things happen. And it has a general sort of vibe of the occult and the mystical, from touching on various voodoo effigies to a lot of God-fearing in many regards, to like the small communities in sort of the deep south, like Louisiana and so on and so forth, which is quite interesting to read about. Past that, there isn't really that much. There's little bits of hearsay and folk tales, bits and pieces just to sort of string it together, but the world building doesn't really come into that much beyond individual bits of story for each character. So overall, that's probably the weakest point of this book, but it does a good job of informing the story overall, so it's certainly not a detriment. Positives and negatives. Going to start with the negatives. There's only really a couple for me. The first one does come to the world building itself. Whilst this does have a folklore feel to it, the lack of world building, and there's no real deep dive into folklore in particular, or stories to do with what's going on historically speaking within the book. Whilst it doesn't hurt it, I would have liked a little bit more, almost like a Tales Around the Campfire sort of thing going on. On top of that, whilst the core family do get some good time, Abigail, the eldest sister in particular, comes off pretty shortchanged overall, and there's not really much of a supporting cast other than the antagonistic step-parents. So, which is a bit of a shame. It sort of pulls out a little bit of the emotional sort of weight of it, especially when certain events happen a bit later on in the book. But again, I don't think that's a major issue. Now, in terms of positives, whilst I have said this is a slow title, it's very much because it's a paranormal psychological horror, and it is a very gradual build-up of tension from the moment straight after the crash, because it starts with a big bang and quite a big set piece, to the calm down straight afterwards, and then the did I see that out the corner of my eye, and the very slow build throughout the entire story until the crescendo at the end. And this has a really, really wild ending, which I kind of didn't expect, because it's not a happy ending, to put it mildly. The other thing that I really like about this is, whilst a lot of Jack's decisions as a parent I don't quite get at times, the fact that him and Amy are still in love with each other and still so close despite how different they are is actually quite an interesting dynamic. It does read a little bit like a dynamic of two people who definitely should not be together. And the third thing is, as you dig into Jack's backstory, especially when he goes back home to where he was brought up, there's some really interesting commentary there, and you see some real symmetry between what's happening now and what happened in his past. And that's really well done as well, especially as foreshadowing for the actual end of the book itself. final thoughts on this one. So for me, this goes in high beta. I really liked this. I do think it'll be a bit too slow for some people, however, but the way this book ended in particular was not quite how I expected it to be, and it was in many ways quite a big gut punch, and there was a few things that were foreshadowed earlier on in the book which really did come home to roost at the end. So for those reasons, I think if you're a fan of a paranormal psychological horror, this should be a must read for you. But that's just my opinion. I would love to know yours. Have you read this or any of Ahlborn's other books? If you have, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below, and I will catch you all next time.